Hello, everyone. This is Brett, and welcome to another Waking from the Meaning Crisis Discord Q&A. We are here with John Vervaeke. Thanks, John, for being here once again.
It's great to be here as always.
And John, so your recording with Jordan Peterson just dropped yesterday, and a lot of people are spending a lot of time in the past day or so devouring it. Now that it's released, can you give us some of your reflections on the talk?
Well, let me see. I was happy to be there. It was challenging at first because in his excitement, I don't think there was any malicious intent. But in his excitement, Jordan kept interrupting me quite a bit at the beginning. But I had resolved, I set myself to act and embody logos. So I dropped into sort of logos Tai Chi mode and just kept doing my best to add things and read things. And then about, and I don't know what other people have told me because my own perception of time was different at the time. I guess about a third of the way through or half the way through, it starts to shift. It becomes much more dialogical in nature. But progressively, I think, or reciprocal. It ended very well, very positively. We sort of remembered, I think, how we were colleagues of each other, and that was very good. He invited me back on, and that's already set. I'm going to be recording on September the 10th with him and Jonathan Pajot. I've been talking to Jonathan about that. And by the way, I thank Jonathan for being on the Discord server, and he was very appreciative of being on. So just thought I'd share that with you. And okay. So I imagine sometime towards the end of September, there'll be another video on Jordan's channel with the three of us.
Oh, that's exciting. We will all wait eagerly for that. All right, let's get into questions. So Uber Hogenic has a question they'd like me to read. I sense some confusion around the will to power in your conversation with Peterson. Do you think Nietzsche scholars would agree with that characterization? And maybe if you could, just for people who haven't heard it, if you recall, if you could maybe give a little summary of what that characterization was.
Jordan's characterization of the will to power?
I think that's what he's asking for. But
I'm trying to remember it, actually. I recorded this quite a while ago, almost a month ago. And I haven't had a chance to re-listen to the video. If somebody could remind me, just give me a quick. If somebody's seen it, that would be helpful to me. I'm trying to remember. We had a discussion. You have to understand, it was almost a 3-hour discussion. There was a lot we discussed too. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the similarities and differences between the Nietzschean will to power and Spinoza's notion of conatus. But I don't specifically remember that. I'm sorry. I need a little bit of a refresher to call that back to mind.
All right, no worries. If someone has something, you can put it in the event text. Or Uber Hogenic, you're on. If you want to add some more detail, I can read it in. And Struan, I've invited you in. You have the next question.
Just before Struan comes on, I want to say to everybody, you all have me at a disadvantage. Many of you have just watched the video, and I have not been in contact with that content for close to a month. So I don't know if I can answer specific questions about it, unless you can refresh it for me specifically.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, Struan is having some mic issues, so he will be back. The next, and sorry, with this new system, I have to go back and forth into my setting, into the event text. So Manuel has a question. I've been having trouble maintaining attention. I've been experiencing this as a black fog that is disrupting my relation to introception. I've been struggling in my meditation to maintain presence of mind. This problem seems to largely getting resolved as a consequence of drinking coffee. This allows me to have a less disrupted attention. This also inverted my regression into a depressive state. Is there a way for me to cultivate a better way of attending where I can build resilience to getting overwhelmed like that? Or is there a way that I can cultivate a relation with coffee that minimizes my dependence? And he says Mark Lefebvre can explain more if needed.
There's a tradition of people trying various stimulants. In the Zen tradition, they often used a green tea, which isn't quite as spiky as coffee, and seems to be a little bit more conducive. Overall, the general recommendation is you need to be practicing a significant and demanding form of moving mindfulness so that your brain doesn't build an unchallengeable association between meditation and falling into a very deep kind of sedentary state. So you need to teach your brain that it can be simultaneous, and this has to do with activating the cerebellum and trying to get the task focus network and the default network associated at the same time, while still ameliorating the default, like reducing the activity of the default mode network. And so, you want to try and teach your brain that it can be pursuing mindfulness, shutting off the default mode network, and yet still be quite engaging of the cerebellum and the task focus, or it's sometimes called the task priority network. Like in all of psychology, they're giving it about 2 or 3 different names for no good reason other than to push people's careers. So generally, you can try experimenting with green tea because it tends to be less spiky and less disruptive. You can definitely do some exercise before you sit, but I recommend you take up something that is a movement challenging, something that will engage the task focus network and the cerebellum form of mindfulness, Tai Chi Chuan, Aikido, flow yoga, things like that. Because basically what's happening is you're triggering too much of the parasympathetic machinery, and the brain is integrating that with a propensity for you to lose the attentional machinery in the prefrontal cortex. So that would be my general recommendation.
Thank you for that. Struan, you've fixed your mic issues, I believe.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, we can
Hi,
hear
John.
you.
Hey, Struan, good to hear from you.
Yeah, it's good to hear you as well, John. I just want to see if I can't help Uber Riogenic with his question, because you and Jordan were talking about Heidegger and the Nazis, and Michel Foucault and the world and the power way, like the procedural. Or Heidegger was talking about technology, right? And everything is become standing reserve, and I think that's what Uber Riogenic is looking for more engagement on.
Yeah, but I was trying to. Yeah, it does. I remember that conversation. I was trying to remember if there was something idiosyncratically specific about Jordan's presentation of the Nietzschean will to power. I do remember that conversation, and I remember talking about the attempt to Heidegger's attempt to address the extension of will to power into technology, and then Heidegger's influence from Eckhart and others in the notion of Gelesenheit and a transformation that was much more comprehensive than just a political or even socio-political interpretation. I remember talking about that. If I remember correctly, Jordan was receptive to that, to the idea that Heidegger had a more profound analysis, because Nietzsche's analysis tends to be just the inversion of Christianity, and therefore bound to it. And I think his take on Spinoza's understanding and the Stoics' understanding is also mistaken in an important way. So I hope that helps.
Okay. Yeah, I think Uber Riogenic is looking for engagement with Nietzsche scholars, because he thinks Nietzsche's will to power is maybe more, it's being read a little bit too superficially, but I'm just guessing here on his behalf. I can't say for sure. Yeah.
I mean, the the acknowledged influence is Schopenhauer's Will to Life, which is very much, a Kantian unconscious that's driving people into a sort of nihilistic existence, and then Nietzsche inverts it and makes it something positive. The unacknowledged influence is through Spinoza and Canetus, and the idea, and Spinoza's notion of Canetus is much more like the notion of self-organizing autopoiesis. It's much more like that, and Nietzsche would have benefited if he had paid more careful attention to the way Spinoza is presenting it. So for Nietzsche, it's still a post-Lutheran, post-Schopenhauerian interpretation that doesn't jive well with either the Heideggerian critique of technology or sort of what's being discovered about self-organizing and autopoietic systems.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, well, that's quite interesting. Hopefully Uberriogenic likes that answer. Okay, so my question. You were speaking about, in the elusive eye, the language between the language of training and the language of explaining. I
Yeah,
was wondering, isn't that just the language of meaning?
I don't know. I was trying to get at something like, the language of the imaginal. Um, that I admitted at the time I was also struggling, right? I was trying to
Yeah.
get at something that I was trying to get at in terms of its functionality. Yeah, I mean, it's going to have the connectedness, but I was trying to get at something that uh, accesses the imaginal in the way that would enhance training, but also accesses the imaginal in a way that will do what Corban wants it to do, which is to bridge between um, the conceptual and the sensual in an explanatory fashion. That's what I was sort of trying to get at. But
Okay.
does that make any sense? Because you and I have talked about stuff along
No,
these
that,
lines. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. The well, the distinction between the conceptual and the sensual, that's like the distinction between body and mind, right? I don't know if I'm pushing a little bit far on that with the sense and the body, but
For Corban, I mean, this is where he differs from Jung. For Corban, it's much more of a Platonic distinction, almost between hypostasis, right? So, what he calls sensual would conform very much to the Platonic notion of the sensible world, the world of opinion, and the conceptual would be like the world of the forms, the intelligible. That's how Corban would be using it, and that's what I was trying to point to too, in some ways.
okay. But, I mean, if we map that onto Plato, then the world of opinion is basically the material world of becoming, right?
Yeah, yeah. Although saying material is unfair to Plato because he doesn't have that notion of matter. But yeah, what we would call that today, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I'm being quite rough with my words. Yeah, no, I
That's
mean
fair.
well, I like the idea of the language of explaining sitting between, the Platonic, the two, the Platonic world of forms is the general, and then the material world is the particular, and
Yep,
then,
yep.
but then I would have the language of training as sitting. Yeah, I don't have a very good analog in terms of what you've said generally, but I would put that as between the procedural and the participatory, and then that for me is like the language of training, and then the language of meaning
Yeah,
would basically
yep.
be how that's like the nexus between them, like there's a crossover point, and that the language of meaning basically emerges out of that as like a higher order fractal kind of manifestation, if you will. Well, at least in terms of how I would look at the meaning crisis and the symbol of the self, that's where I want to go.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. So you're positing a kind of language um, that's job is something like the articulation of meaning, or I'm trying to get what that language looks like in your mind, because I know what the language of
Yes,
explaining is,
well,
right? Go ahead. Go ahead.
um, yeah, well, for me, the dynamics, the procedural and the participatory together makes the becoming axis, and then the propositional and the perspectival together makes the being axis. So it's static and
Right.
dynamic. And so the language of
Yeah, yeah.
explaining is static, and the language of training is dynamic. And so bringing those together is basically what the self is made out of, and it's bringing all four of those into the harmony, and then Yeah, I don't know. So I've got a whole mind map of this in my head. So it's very difficult for me to just
Oh,
put it out in a
yeah,
sentence or
no,
two.
no,
But like the
that's
yeah,
very
the
interesting.
whole thing kind of just yeah.
I mean, I really do like the integration of the perspectival and the propositional for being because that really captures Theoria really well, and I like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Go
well,
ahead.
I might even go further and make the axis between propositional and perspectival the axis of logos, and then the axis between the procedural and the participatory the axis of agape.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've had sort of similar ideas. I have to think this through more, but prima facie, I like that. That's very good. Um,
Okay.
so I've noticed your two emails. I've glanced over them briefly. As you can imagine, I've been very busy. I've been getting thousands of emails yesterday. But
Yeah, I can
my, my
imagine.
my invitation to you is still open. So if you want to work that out at some point, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds wonderful. And yeah, I mean, this would be very much what I'd want to talk about. So great. Okay, thank you, John. I don't want to steal
Sure.
any more time. So.
And John, feel free to send an auto response to everyone reaching out to you with a link to our Discord. And
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it has been really interesting. I've met some very interesting people. I met a fellow by the name James Schofield, and very interesting work right now, integrating complexity theory and 4E cognitive science and taking it in a much more comprehensive ontological dimension. He's had some discussions with Evan Thompson, so some of it has been very serendipitous, and so I'm very grateful to that. I mean, I'm very grateful to Jordan for having me on and for giving the video a provocative title and for releasing the short videos. People are telling me all the things he's doing, so I'm very appreciative of that.
oh, that's great. So Alex Signora has a question that they'd like me to read. You've often made note of how we use physical metaphors like grasping to talk about abstract ideas. Some cognitive scientists have also suggested that we actually exact
Yeah.
motor sensory functions to manipulate and produce propositional knowledge. At the same time, it seems that procedural knowledge is at least in some cases involved in grounding the meaning of propositions. Am I justified in making that assumption? As in, procedural knowledge is both the referred object and the generating process of propositional knowing.
I was I think I'm in very significant agreement with you, except for the last phrase, which is was a little bit ambiguous to me. But yeah, I mean, I've specifically argued. So I published a lot of work on metaphor, arguing against Lakoff and Johnson, who made a very simplistic. I mean, they were brilliant for discovering the fact that most of our cognition seems to be mapped in a metaphorical fashion from sensory motor behavior. The problem with that is their invocation of metaphor was vacuous because their explanation for metaphor, they had no independent explanation. So all they were doing was pointing to mapping from sensory motor to cognitive. And then, of course, while finding the phenomena so important, while finding the phenomena was very important, their explanation of it was sadly lacking. That's why I've published several criticisms around that. Then, what's been happening mostly from the work Michael Anderson and others is the idea that no, it's not actually a mapping relation, and that's why thinking of it as metaphorical is going to get you into some trouble because, as you said, it's an exactive relation. And so, for me, that's a much better way of explaining of it because many of my criticisms of Lakoff and Johnson were that they saw it being totally bottom up, that the sensory motor was always being mapped into the abstract, and that's because they were influenced by Piaget. And there's been a lot of evidence that for abstract capacities and cognition as early as 4.5 months, so that undermines the proposal. And secondly, there's lots of evidence arguments that I published that there's lots of cognitive top-down influences that are selecting which of the sensory motor patterns are being brought up, how are they being compressed, why you find equivalencies between using grasping and seeing and getting in order to convey understanding, which of course is another metaphor. How are they, the sensory motor patterns are very different, so cognition is somehow abstracting or finding what's in common. So the short of it is a simple mapping and calling it metaphor turned out to be sort of deeply mistaken. There's lots of empirical evidence against it, linguistic, cognitive scientific, neuroscientific, and now there's increasing evidence again that the relationship is one of exaptation, which helps to explain certain things, why we find certain things belonging together in ways that don't quite seem like metaphor, but yet they have that weird belonging together, like the fact that we find that certain strings of words and certain music belong together in this weird phenomenon we call sound, a song, and like what's going on there. And so the exaptation metaphor, sorry, not the exaptation metaphor, the exaptation model is turning out to be a much more powerful one. I think it is a correct model. It explains development. The work that Michael Anderson has done in his published work, and especially in his book After Phrenology, he thinks of the earlier model as very much like phrenology, kind of a pseudoscience. And so, I take that to be very, very, very important. And I think it challenges things that other people have not properly challenged. I brought this out in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and I brought it up Paul, but I need to bring it up more specifically because somebody who's had a significant influence on me was Barfield and his notion of participation. But Barfield reads it. He reads our use of words that have sort of that we give either a metaphorical or a literal meaning as an indication of sort of an evolution in consciousness. The problem with that is, so that's a phylogenetic explanation. The problem is, given the work of Michael Anderson and converging work, like I've been mentioning, some of my own work from machine learning, etc., circuit reuse, the ontogenetic explanation that no, this is happening within individuals all the time, because we're constantly exapting in that way. I think it undermines the sort of phylogenetic explanation that Barfield's giving. What that means is, I think we're entering a stage in which I think there's going to. Well, I tried to foreshadow this. Probably didn't do a very good enough job. We're entering a stage where there's going to be a significant rethinking of, metaphor and symbolic cognition. There's a lot happening right now. There's a lot happening in neuroscience about, similarities between metaphor and other kinds of cognitive processes. You're getting the same kind of rapid interaction and integration between the left and right hemispheres, like garden path sentences, humor. So what we're seeing is we're starting to do good science. We're starting to see a much more generalized phenomena, and we're starting to understand it much more cleanly in terms, I think, of exaptation. Of course, one of the biggest areas that's talking about this, sorry I'm going on, but this is something that's very much on my mind right now. It has been, right, this has been sort of a fulfilled prediction from 4E cognitive science. Cognitive science kept talking about the importance of embodiment and inaction for understanding cognition, and basically making this kind of prediction at a theoretical level, and now the empirical research is growing dramatically for it. Is there a direct connection, therefore, between the procedural and the propositional? Probably, in terms of, there seems to be, so I think Arbib, let me give you an example of it. Everything I'm talking about, and I'll address that final point. So Arbib has this, and I talked about this, I think, in this series, has a very good theory about how we get from something that's sensory motor procedural to something that's proposition. What's the intervening thing? And he talks about the capacity for pantomime. Because in pantomime, what I do is I use the movements that are sensory motor generators of actions, achieving certain goals, and I exact them from being actions to being communications. That's what I'm doing in pantomime. And then but the thing about pantomime is once you make that move, it becomes open and displaced. I can pantomime about things that aren't here right now. I can combine various pantomimings together in a way I wouldn't combine those movements if I was doing sensory motor interaction. And then that opens up. And this explains all the work of Susan Golden Meadow and others about gesture. It also explains another weird universal, like why we find dance such a natural thing to do. And so in that sense, you can see pantomime and gesture as bridging between the procedural and the propositional. And RB offers it as, I think, a very convincing account of how we got the transition, why gesture is so powerful and so functional for us, and why we're almost always gesturing as we're engaging in propositional speech. So what's interesting is then there seems to be one more stage before that. Before you get to full propositional, you have the pantomiming, the gesturing, and then you get all the work of Derek Bickerton, in which you can get where children will spontaneously take a pidgin and convert it into a Creole. So there seems to be a pidgin is just a string of words without any grammatical words, and it's usually where people don't share a language and they create a pidgin. And what you typically get is you can get gesturing to help bridge between a pidgin and a Creole. You see this in children. So children will start speaking one or two word sentences where they're basically like a pidgin. They'll just be nouns. Bottle me, which means I want the bottle. There's no functional grammatical words like and or but or the. Right? And what they do is then they accompany it with a gesture to help bridge, to convey what the missing meaning. And so you're starting to see how you can get a continuum from the procedural through the pantomimetic, bringing in the pidgin, and then combining them and making something what's called a Creole, where you start to get the beginnings of syntax. And we know the area of the brain for fine motor control in the hand has been exapted, again, exaptation, into syntactic organization of speech sounds. And so there you go. That's my best attempt to talk about all of that. But what's exciting is how much convergence is forming around all of this right now. I predict that Michael Anderson's work is going to be increasingly more famous. I'm going to try and make his work and Tomasello's work the core of how I'm going to start teaching cognitive development. I predict this is the future. I think, like I said, it's going to have a huge impact on our fundamental understanding of what Gibbs once called the poetics of mind in his famous book. So that's my best shot at that.
And just a reminder for those who are joining us midway through that if you want to ask a question, to cue your question in event text. If you want me to read it out for you, please let me know. And Mark, you have a question for John.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
Good, Mark. How are you?
I'm not having the best day in the world, but that's okay. I will survive.
Sorry to hear that. Anything? I don't want to spill your guts on in a public situation. I hope it resolves for you.
No, I'm just trying to help a friend, and trying to help people is always difficult because they'd rather be them than be better. So, yeah. I was listening I haven't finished your talk with Peterson because it's very dense, and I decided I could take notes on it, and then discovered that is a very difficult task. But one section that I did get through is you were both talking about love, and
yes,
it seemed to me like you were equivocating, both of you, by the way, on the word love, which I think you point out in the series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis that we do. Like, we just use love all over the place to mean all kinds of things. And So just to summarize, because I know you said it's been a while since you did the talk. You talked about your partner needing to find a space within you, an available place for them to transcend when they need to, and that has to be reliable. And you were like, that's the core of what it means to love somebody. And Peterson went back to the reality is most justifiable is brought about by the action of truth in service of love, right? And so I didn't know if you had a way to riff on that, or if you wanted to match it up to the Greek definitions, or if you could sort of untangle the love knot a little bit for us.
I like that. Untangle the love knot. That's pretty good. That's good. Well done. So given the context, again, like I said, you have me have a disadvantage, but given that Jordan was regularly weaving things into the Christian context, I took it that we were talking about agape and to some degree philia, but the question was pitched, and you're right. You're absolutely right. I should have tried to indicate, and I have said this explicitly elsewhere. I think a romantic relationship, which should have all three. It should have eros, philia, and agape. I was talking about the combination of sort of fellowship and agape within the Christian context, and then I moved it into the romantic context because I do think that I think there's good evidence for this too. A good romantic relationship should have all three loves in an integrated and mutually supporting fashion. So I was primarily using agape and philia there. The philia was the reciprocity of the mutual realization, and then the agape was me basically affording her realization, which of course is agape. So you're right. I should have specified, because I did distinguish them at another point in the conversation. I remember when I talked about philia Sophia and philia Nakia. I should have been clear that I was integrating those two together within a romantic relationship, because I saw those two also as existing within the Christian context, because the Christian context attempts to integrate the agape of Christ with the fellowship of the body of Christ, the philia. So that's what was going on. Part of the problem, that's not the right way of putting it. Part of the challenge I had in that was that it was very rapid, and at times it was very associational, and trying to get a careful and rigorous line of argument and conceptual development going was at times challenging in that interaction. I don't want to misrepresent it. I thoroughly enjoyed it a lot, and I thought it started becoming more and more genuine dialogos as things went on. But I was a little bit uncomfortable that I couldn't be as careful as I typically like to be. So you're right in catching me in that. But as much as I can reconstruct, that's what I think was going on at the time.
Yeah, that sounds right. Very rapid fire, right? Jordan seems to be up to something specific in that conversation. I have my own thoughts about what that might be, but you are the perfect person to talk about the things he wanted to talk about. And I don't know if he was like firing on all cylinders for the first time, or I missed a conversation or two where he was that, we'll say, excited and capable to keep up. And then I just wanted to mention that, but wrapping it back to my question. So basically, I think what you're saying you were trying to do was come up around this idea of wrapping the philia and agape together in the same way that Christianity did, without using the Christian frame. Is that a fair reframing of what you said?
Yeah, because I did at some point also mention the Buddhist Sangha as trying to do something similar there too. So I think what you've just said is, again, I'm a little bit hesitant, Mark, because I'm not trusting my reconstructive fallible memory right now. But I can say right now that I agree with what you just said, and it seems to me that that's what I was trying to say at the time.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, thank you for clearing that up, John. It sounds and I haven't listened to the whole talk yet because it's long and I'm trying to take notes. And yeah, I've stopped at least 24 times, and I'm only an hour and something in, so I'm not anticipating to be done anytime soon. But I appreciate the clarification. That really helps. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm sure you'll get a lot, and I'm hoping it will slow down, but you'll get a lot when Jordan and Jonathan and I have our three-way conversation.
Cannot wait. It was awesome to have Jonathan here, and I can't be more happy about any other conversation on the internet.
He was like I said, I had an email conversation with him. He was very complimentary to the Discord server. So I'm just going to pass that on again. I hope you guys can get Zevi Slavin on soon, because the 4-part series I did with him on cognitive science and mysticism, I thought was really excellent. He is sharp, and careful, but also caring and present and engaging. So if you guys can you folks, sorry, I'm trying to change that. If you folks can reach out to him, I think that would be an excellent idea.
Great. Yes. We're working on it. So thanks, John, and thanks for passing on those comments.
I can be sorry for interrupting. If I can be of any help with you getting Zevi on, please let me know.
Oh, sure. I definitely will. Joe has a question for you. Per the elusive per the elusive I, and decomposing the self into the I, me, and the socially constructed selves seems very close to Lacan's triadic structure of the self, where he uses the term real, one, imaginary, socially constructed, or real, I guess, I, imaginary, socially constructed, and symbolic, me. Lacan's use and development of this theory predate cognitive science, but he did use it in his psychological practice. Have you looked into the parallels in his work and yours, and how they might contribute either to the theory or the therapies that derive from such an approach? He focuses on attempting not to drop the illusion of self, but to rebalance these three components.
The short answer is I have a couple of books on Lacan that I've not yet read. I was unaware. I have some very superficial understanding of Lacan. There's only so many typically put in the postmodern group. I don't know if that's fair or not to Lacan. I've devoted most of my time to understanding Derrida, Caputo, and Mark Taylor, and also Foucault a bit, and of course, as the grandfather, Heidegger, a bit of Levinas as well. But Lacan is somebody on my reading list. And I'm coming to that point in my life where I think the books might extend beyond my lifespan, the books I need to read. But thank you for that recommendation. If you could point to a more specific text by Lacan about that mapping, I'd like to see it. I mean, it sounds. I just know prima facie, but also from what you're saying, that Lacan and I have converging interests. So that's all I can say. You make a good case. You strengthen the case for why I need to read the books I have on Lacan. But I'd also like to be able to zero in faster on the place where he makes those specific claims that map onto some of the stuff we talked about in the elusive I. So if you could let me know, that'd be great. But thank you. You've just reinforced the fact that I need to undertake to read Lacan, which I understand is very much like reading Heidegger. And one say that Lacan has his own language, and it takes some time to learn that language, almost like learning another culture. So thank you for that. I'm sorry I can't say much that's very insightful about it, other than that sounds very promising. And Lacan is somebody I've always intended to read more of, but have not had the chance to do so right now. Up till now, I should say. Thank you.
Velaskin, you have a question.
Hi, John. So, the thing that keeps going on my mind recently is so this relationship between, let's say, the kind of animal part of the human and of the human psyche, and the kind of more meaning seeking one. So by the animal, I mean like hedonistic, pleasure seeking, pain avoiding, and the much more sophisticated kind of meaning systems. The thought I'm going along at the moment is that kind of the hedonistic part is kind of constitutive of the meaning part. But I would like to know whether you also think they are, like, I assume you do think they are continuous with each other, but I was wondering if you had anything to say about how.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to put you off, Luskin, but interaction on the Elusive Eye between Greg Enriquez and Chris and I about that. There was a whole section about that because we were trying to build up how you get from sort of a something that is plausibly a reflective self up to personhood, and how you bridge between Greg uses language a primate, but primate of course is an animal, a mammal. And how you bridge between a primate and a person. And so we talked about how there are intervening stages, and the primate is really important because the primate is a mammal, it's parental, and then you've got clear evidence for a kind of reflective self-awareness and the mirror tasks and other things, other tasks, other behavior they perform. But so you get very close, and then I've already talked about how you bridge between all of that and the propositional. But what Greg talks about is once you get that bridging going, you enter into a new kind of selfhood in which you are in the realm of justification. And Greg makes a very good point. It's a two-part point. I think he makes the point better than Mercier and Sperber do about how that propositional processing enhances distributed cognition. That gives it a special power and authority. But you have to combine that with the fact that propositions give us access into other people's minds in a way that there's no other behavior that human beings engage in gives us access to the inner workings of their mind the way propositions do, which means we have to create a whole new set of defense processes to defend the self, given that kind of massive exposure that propositions give us. And so we build the system of justification whereby we have propositional practices to protect the self. And of course, that has a downside to it. That has all the cognitive biases, the my side bias, all the motivated reasoning. But it has the positive benefit to it that we enter the realm of communicative and moral normativity. We get bound into normativity. And so the thing about us is what you just said. There's a continuity between the person level and the primate level. And meaning, of course, ultimately, I think bridges between them, because you have the kind of meaning that is found in interaction, sensory motor behavior, and then you have the kind of meaning that we think of as semantic meaning within propositions, and then the meaning that I think matters the most to us is that those kinds of processes, and I've talked about them at length elsewhere, that help to bridge between them. But I think the way, if you can take a look at, I can't remember which episodes it is in the Elusive Eye, so I think it's 9 and 10. Yeah, I think it's 9 and 10, where Greg and I are integrating my work on recursive relevance realization of the self with his work on how do you go from the primate to the person, and because I think Greg does a lot of important work. And he's writing his book right now showing how that continuity can work between the different ways in which our connectedness to the world gets exapted and transformed, but also therefore builds a new requirement for realignment and reintegration with that from which it was exapted. Did that in any way address your concerns?
It went some way to doing so. Um, I think I may have misled you with the protection of animals. Sorry, I was trying to be very specific about like the
Oh,
hedonism kind of like pleasure
oh,
pain kind of thing. I like that does help, but I specifically want to know how we get from this very basic seeking pleasure, avoiding pain up to
well, okay.
this meaningful.
Great. So what I just said will actually help to do that then. Um, so we talk about in the meaning in life literature, we talk about hedonic and eudaimonia or eudaimonistic. And in hedonic, it's right, it's pleasure oriented. And of course, that is very self centered, or at least let's maybe say egocentric in the way it orients people in the world. But then when you get to mammals, especially mammals that have the beginnings of self-awareness and cultural reflection, right? You get a change because the parent has to, right? The parent has to be motivated by something other than pleasure. So we talked about this in the series as well, and this is where all of the work of Bowlby and Ainsworth and my good friend and colleague Jeff McDonald, this is where the attachment machinery comes in. And the attachment machinery is not organized around pleasure. The attachment machinery is organized around bonding, because the child has to bond with the adult has to bond with the child. Now the attachment machinery gets you committed to things other in a way that is not sorry, I'm stumbling, egocentric. And then that opens you up to the next move, which is how can you matter or make yourself relevant to the justification system? Because if you don't make yourself relevant, on one hand, you're losing out the power of distributed cognition, and on the other hand, you have no defense against that vulnerability, that propositional processing. And then you get this new thing, which is further extension of that machinery. You can almost say you become attached to your culture. We talk about it as our motherland and our fatherland and our mother culture, our mother tongue and all that stuff. And that's not happenstance. And that helps to build us up towards mattering, where we find most of our meaning in life in terms of how we are connected to justification systems, cultural systems, intergenerational systems, etc. I won't go into that in any more detail. And how we are relevant to them, as opposed to how everything is relevant to me. In hedonism, it's how are things relevant to me. In attachment, for the parent, it's how am I relevant to the child. And then when you move to eudaimonia, it's just how am I relevant to the cultural justification person-making system. And potentially, people exact that, and you get this in religious traditions and mysticism. How am I relevant to something that, right, how is the culture as a whole mattering or relevant to the environment? That go a little bit more specifically towards your question?
Most definitely, yes. So,
Well,
would I be
sorry,
right?
we've just got about 3 minutes left, so I think we're gonna have to move on. There's two more questions, but thanks Vervaeke. We could maybe pick it up again next month. So appreciate it. Fourier Transform would like to know, John, what is something as of recently that has awestruck you?
Is something recently that has awestruck me. Well, this, I hope this doesn't sound weird. I'm reading a book by David Schindler. I don't know if it's David. It's D.C. Schindler. Maybe it's David Schindler, but it's D.C. Schindler, called Plato's Critique of Impure Reason on Goodness and Truth in the Republic. I'm currently reading so many great books on Plato, but this could be the greatest book on Plato I've ever read, and I'm deeply into it. I'm reading it with Dan Chiappi, and Schindler is just brilliant. It's just like his brilliance affords me seeing things Plato that I'd never seen before at a profound level, both in terms of just the writing, the masterpiece that the Republic is as writing, but also the profundity of the connection that Plato draws between love, intelligibility, and goodness. And there have been moments when I've been awestruck at it. It's just I get that glimpse of a mind. Schindler's brilliance affords me a platform. I can climb on Schindler's shoulders, and the brilliance. The word is inadequate as I say it. Of Plato's thought in the Republic, or Plato's thought, or Socrates. The two are inseparable, and at times I've been awestruck.
Is that a book you'd recommend for the average layperson, or is that a more advanced book?
I think you'd need to read a few books on Plato. It's well written. It's clear. It's not technical. It's not laden with jargon. You might want to read a couple of books, maybe one or two by Drew Hyland, or think, because he's also addressing a lot of current Plato scholarship. But if you've read some Plato, especially if you've read The Republic, give it a try. It's a brilliant book. Absolutely brilliant.
Great, and Andre will have the final word. Just so you know, Andre's been doing the moderating during this call, and he's been doing a great job. So thank you very much, Andre, for helping moderate.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John and Brett. John, I hope you've been well. It's been a while since we talked.
Yeah, I have been. I've been very lucky that the new medication for my Meniere's has been consistently good for 6 months. The new exercise, losing some weight, the blood pressure medication, all of that has contributed significantly to a significant improvement for me. So thank you for asking.
Oh, it's great to hear. So, as Brett said, I've been moderating this call, but I also had to pen this, I would say not letter, but question or comment, really. So I've just got some points. So I just wanted to follow up from that question I asked you in the last Q&A. After your reply, I had a lot of positive acclaim and feedback from many people in this Discord, telling that both what they said, my heartfelt question, and the authenticity of your response, and I definitely felt that as well. And all that sort of pouring back of response, I think, is indicative and reflective of this community, like what we're about, the server, this Discord, like all the people in it. And I think it really gives us hope. And as you know, I sent you another email after that, and I put quite a bit of thought into that email and heart. And even though your reply to me was quite brief, as like I'm aware that you're very busy as a lecturer and all the work you do, the reply you did give me, it really validated my effort, and the words I brought a lot of humility and even maybe awestruck, because you said my email was beautiful and that I touched you deeply by it, and what's more, I encouraged you, and you're the mind, soul, and heart behind this server and this whole project and the search for meaning in the world. What's more, like, for you to say that I inspired you, it really sort of brought me down to earth. It was, as I'm someone who has gone through struggling through life and a lot of mental turmoil for many, many years up until the last year. And I've emerged to this point where, like, I'm transcending into a flourishing and fulfilled life right now. Hearing that I've inspired and encouraged you, it means a real, huge and great deal to me. I've been a big and core part of this Discord community for like the last year, and I put a lot of soul and energy into this Discord. I've tried to help everyone who comes through here, and I think we've done incredible things for people, and I've seen it firsthand. And knowing that my work is being seen by the person who's been causal in this massive thing in my life, I just want to thank you personally for all of this, John, and every other member in this Discord. Thanks you for your work, and we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and my reply was sincere. And thank you again for your email. And I, well, I meant what I said, obviously, but I mean, I think it bodes well for your ability to be of good service in this community to others. And so I look forward to seeing and hearing about how you've helped others on the Discord server and in this community. So thank you. And thank you in advance for what you're going to do. Um, that's all I really have to say.
Thank you so much, John. God bless.
And thank you so much, Andre, and everyone for asking such great questions once again. I'd like to remind people, though, that you don't have to. You can ask simple questions. I want to encourage that as well. I love all these great, deep questions, but I want to encourage people to ask the simpler questions, even if you just have a question about understanding something in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis or one of his talks. You don't have to outdo everyone in questions. I want to make sure that it's open to everybody and everybody feels comfortable asking questions. And if you're listening on YouTube and you'd like to ask questions, feel free to join the Discord. The link will be posted below, and you can see our calendar of events. We have lots of stuff going on. And thank you, John, as always, for being here. It's just such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much, Brett. And thank you, Andre, for moderating. And I look forward to talking to all of you folks next month. And thanks again, everyone, for all the support. As always, it's very much appreciated.
Thanks, John, and have a great day, everyone.